So joining us tonight is Alyssa Johnson, and she is an environmental educator at the Montezuma Audubon Center in Savannah, New York. Alyssa is an FLCC alum, and she graduated with degrees in natural resources conservation and environmental studies. And she's also an alum of Cobleskill, where she graduated with a degree in wildlife management. She has had the awesome opportunity of working in Alaska and Alabama, the Florida Keys, and now she's back in New York in a full-time position at Montezuma. She also worked at Finger Lakes Community College for a little while in the technician position. And I just wanted to say that I met Alyssa while I was a student at FLCC. And previous to knowing her, I didn't really have any interest in birds. Like, I was just like, okay, I like birds. But when I met her and saw her passion for birds and, picking out minor details, all these different species, my love and appreciation really grew for them. And now I must say I am a bird watcher. Like, that's a really favorite hobby of mine. So thank you, Alyssa.
Oh, that's so awesome. I
Yeah,
love that.
yeah,
Yeah, bird
thank
watching is
you.
great because anybody can do it from anywhere. And maybe not bird watching is maybe not the right term, but birding.
Sure.
Because I've heard amazing stories of some blind people who have an amazing ear
Mm,
and can bird like, their other senses are heightened. So birding in general is something that anybody can do from anywhere. You can be in downtown Manhattan or you can be in the Alaskan wilderness and there's birds to be seen. So thank you for sharing that, Allie.
yeah. So I'm
Are you,
I'm gonna pass it over to you in just a second.
okay.
For everybody that's here, if you have questions, you can use the chat box. You can use the Q&A box. Sometimes one shows up and the other one doesn't. Whatever is available to you, and we'll take questions at the end. And Alyssa, you can go for it.
Okay, great. I'm just looking at the numbers or the people who have joined, see if I know anybody. Thank you, Allie, and I'm very happy to be presenting in the Speaking of Nature series at the, well, not at, but on behalf of the Mueller Field Station at in Finger Lakes Community College. As Allie said, I am an alumni 2012 from a couple of the programs at Finger Lakes Community College, and I also worked at the college. So it's just all full circle to come back and do a presentation. And tonight's presentation is about the bald eagles of New York State, but more specifically, how they were repopulated and reintroduced. And so the title of my presentation is Bald Eagles Back from the Brink, Brink of Extinction. And I am a pretty informal presenter, so I'm not really used to this platform, WebEx, but if I see, or Allie, feel free to pop in and tell me there's a question. I'm happy to answer questions as I'm going, or at the end is fine as well. So first I want to put Montezuma, or excuse me, I'm going to start with Audubon. So many people are familiar with the National Audubon Society, and we have coast to coast influence. We are in all of the states. There is some representation in some way. There are chapters, which are kind of like clubs, nature centers, which is what I work out of, national and state staff, and then of course, many, many partners, supporters across the nation. And so not every state has nature centers, not every state might have chapters, but there is something, at least something in every state. And you can see here in New York, let's see this green blob that is a center. So that's the Montezuma Audubon Center. This is a chapter center. I think it's Beaver Meadow out near Buffalo. And then we have one down in the Hudson Valley in Cold Spring that is Constitution Marsh. And then on Long Island, we have Theodore Roosevelt Audubon Center and Sanctuary. So the mission is to protect the birds in the places that they need to thrive, not only today, but into the future, because if birds have clean air and clean water and good habitat, then humans will benefit from that, as well as all of the other wildlife species that live around places where birds do, which is pretty much everywhere. And we use things like science and advocacy, education, and then boots on the ground conservation to do this important work. So to place where I'm from, where I work, many people are familiar with Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge, and that is what you see from the thruway from I-90 as you are driving between Syracuse and Rochester. There's that big eagle sculpture that so many people recognize. It's kind of hard to miss. Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge is a federal entity, so that is run by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service agency, and that is part of what we call the Montezuma Wetlands Complex. There is approximately 10,000 acres of protected land owned by the federal government there. And then north of the thruway, there is about 10,000 acres, a lot of state land, so owned by the New York State DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation. And their land that they manage is called the Northern Montezuma Wildlife Management Area. So we have state and federal agencies. And then I work out of the Montezuma Audubon Center, which is in Savannah in Wayne County, the south eastern corner of Wayne County. And the building that I work out of and the land that I work on is actually owned by the state. So we have this great partnership. The state provides the building, they maintain the property, the building, the facilities, but we do all the educational programming, the staffing, we maintain the exhibits. So all of us, the states, the feds, National Audubon, we're a nonprofit. We are all within what we call the Montezuma Wetlands Complex, and we're located off the north end of Cayuga Lake. So here's a map of the complex. It encompasses about 50,000 acres. There's 2 visitor centers, the one I work out of and the one at the National Wildlife Refuge. The one at the National Wildlife Refuge is accessible from routes 5 and 20 in Seneca Falls. Throughout the complex, we have 25 miles of trails. There's 8 canoe and kayak launches, and of course, many different recreational, educational, and volunteer opportunities. I mentioned the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, or the Refuge, and the DEC, but I also want to mention the Friends of the Montezuma Wetlands Complex, which is its own nonprofit entity. They are a support group. So all across the country, you'll see these kinds of friends groups with state parks, national parks, refuges, and it's a group of a lot of times volunteers that help raise money for projects or provide staffing support in some way. And our friends are great friends of ours and have helped many programs or projects or financial needs across the complex for years. And actually coming up in a couple weeks, I think it's September 10th and 11th, is the annual Montezuma Muck Race, which is a 24-hour birding competition. You can be in a non-competitive category and just go birding for the fun of it, but it's a fundraiser. Really cool. I'd be happy to talk more about that at another time. And then last, I'm going to talk about, or just want to mention MARSH, this group over here with the duck symbol. MARSH stands for the Montezuma Alliance for the Restoration of Species and Habitats. So that's a volunteer group that does a lot of work on removing invasive plant species like Japanese barberry, honeysuckle, water chestnut, milfoil. I mean, the list goes on, and multiflora rose on and on and on. If there's one thing that invasive species are good for, it's job security in this field. So the Marsh volunteers help us do a lot of great work that we, and when I say we, I mean the state staff, the federal staff, and then us at Audubon, we just could not do without their help. I love this picture. I took it. I don't love it just because I took it, but I think it's just so pretty. I took this just a couple weeks ago. We got some great native wildflowers in here. The yellow is called gray coneflower. This lighter purple right here, might recognize that. It's called wild bergamot or bee balm, purple coneflower or echinacea. And then non-natives, Queen Anne's lace, and then this is purple or spotted knapweed, which are not native, but still pollinators visit. And it's just a beautiful time of year, lots of color out there. So we are open Tuesday through Saturdays, 10 to 4. We're open year round. The Refuge Visitor Center has, their hours are really kind of funky since the pandemic began. Well, pre-COVID, the Refuge Visitor Center operates using pretty much all volunteer power. And so we're having issues staffing with volunteers. So I don't want to tell you when their center is open. That's something you should look up on your own. But we are open year round, and we have dedicated hours of 10 to 4. Like I mentioned, our property is maintained by the New York State New York State DEC. There's 198 acres of mixed habitat. We have swamp, we have marsh, we have grasslands, we have woodland. It's just beautiful. So many different habitats to enjoy. And you can do that by hiking on our 2 miles of trails. So the main event, what you're all here for, the bald eagle. So the bald eagle is such a powerful icon of American culture and history. It's our national symbol, and it's one of the largest birds of prey. The wingspan is just amazing. So if you didn't know this, if you stretch out your arms, that's approximately your height. So I'm about 5'7". So when I stretch out my arms, that's 5 feet 7 inches approximately. So depending on how tall you are, you could stretch out your wings here and see what your wingspan is. And bald eagles are much larger, have a much larger wingspan than I do. And they weigh, relatively 10 to 14 pounds. Female raptors, so birds of prey like hawks, falcons, osprey, eagles, the females are larger. It's hard to tell out in the field. It's a real struggle for me, and the conditions have to be just right for me to be able to make that call. But if you hear stories of a bald eagle taking off with a 30-pound lamb, probably not. It probably cannot carry 3 times the weight of its own body weight. But there are lots of myths and stories like that out there. Bald eagles are pretty long-lived. They can live for decades if they're healthy. They mate for life, so they pair. They become sexually mature at 5 years of age, and they might pair up right around maybe a year or so earlier. There's a lot of social interaction with their courtship. There's a lot of bonding, sharing. The male might bring the female a branch or a fish, tossing it back and forth, flying together, and so that may begin just before their 5th year. And then so many people in their minds see bald eagles swooping down on a pristine Alaskan lake with their talons and nabbing a trout out of the water. But the truth is, bald eagles will eat anything, really. They are scavengers. They're opportunists, so they'll eat fish, of course, carrion, meaning roadkill or other dead animals. They eat mammals like muskrats. What else could they? Squirrels, rabbits, snakes. They'll eat other birds like waterfowl. And so they just really are, they'll eat whatever they can. They're not just fish eaters. Another misconception about bald eagles is the sound that they make. And I can't remember which one is which. So let me play this, and hopefully you'll be able to hear it. I'm just looking. So I'm used to using Zoom, and there's a way to play the sound through the platform. So let's see if this works. I'll play it again. Hopefully you can hear that.
I don't hear it. I don't know why.
You don't hear it?
No. Should I make the noise for everyone? Just kidding.
No worries, I'll move on. But I'm going to encourage you to look up what a bald eagle sounds like. And it is not the majestic soaring cry that we are so used to in media. The media really likes to shame their vocalizations, and often you're seeing opening credits for some wilderness scene in a movie or a commercial or something like that. You'll hear this screeching cry, and it's often linked with a bald eagle, but that's 9 times out of 10, it's the call of a red-tailed hawk. We, human culture, pop culture, think that red-tailed hawks sound more majestic than bald eagles, but bald eagles look more majestic. So it's funny, the vocalization often gets not mixed up, like confused, but intentionally misaligned with the wrong bird. Bald eagles to me sound like gulls of some sort, some kind of gull. It's very chirpy, it's high pitched. So I encourage you to look that up and listen to it, because you may be able to detect a bald eagle by that first rather than seeing it. I hear them sometimes when I'm out on the Finger Lakes chirping from the trees. Okay, so breeding season. They're one of our earliest breeders in New York State. The first earliest is the great horned owl. They very well could be on eggs in the end of January in the snow. Bald eagles are not too much further behind. They will start laying in February, March. We usually start seeing them exhibiting some courtship behaviors, maybe late November and December. So we'll see them flying together. We may see them hanging out on the nest together, throwing a stick back and forth, that sort of thing. But they don't really start laying eggs until February, March. Then it's a little over a month incubation period. And then once they hatch, it is a rapid growth. It's really cool to watch them. Over 4 months, they get to be, I have a picture in here later, I'll show you the size of an egg, but could fit in the palm of my hand, an egg. And then they are full grown within 4 months. And 70% of eagles survive their first year. I have heard stories of one chick out competing the other, being stronger and taking all the food, maybe kicking one of them out, kicking a nestmate out. And then, you know, once they fledge, they're on their own. They're not being helped by the parents anymore. So not only are they pursuing, they're a predator, they're after prey, but a lot of times their prey does not want to be caught if they're after live prey. So there's a really steep learning curve, and the strongest will survive. Oh, here we go. Here's that egg. So this is not a real bald eagle egg. This is I think a plaster replica. We have a replica bald eagle nest in our Audubon Center, and these are on display there. But really amazing that an eagle comes out of that and then eventually turns into this. A male is 10 pounds with a 6.5 foot wingspan, females up to 14 pounds with an 8 foot wingspan. So a lot of people are confused by bald eagle plumage. The number of times I have heard from people that they are seeing what they think is a golden eagle, I wish I had a nickel for every time, because I'd be wealthy. Golden eagles look very similar to young bald eagles, but golden eagles only show up in the Finger Lakes region during migration. So like mid-March to mid-April maybe, and then late October, November timeframe in the fall. They don't breed here. So I always tell people to consider probability versus possibility. Is it possible to see a golden eagle in the Finger Lakes? Yes, of course. Birds have wings. They show up in weird places. We have a roseate spoonbill at the Refuge right now. That is a southern wading bird that's found around like the Gulf of Florida, the Florida coast, and like Caribbean, but it's in Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge. So weird things happen. But is it more probable that it's a young bald eagle? Absolutely, because we have many, many bald eagles. So the first year, right after fledging, they are very dark, chocolatey brown all over. They have dark eyes, they have a dark beak, but there are ways to tell goldens and bald eagles apart. And it has to do with some proportions of their head, some coloration of their plumage. Size is not a good metric to use, because if you're looking at something a quarter of a mile away, I'm sorry, you cannot tell me the poundage difference on that bird. I couldn't tell you either. Here we go with a second year bird. So we're starting to get white. A calling card of a young eagle is kind of like white wing, underwing, armpits, underwings, which a golden will not have. And it might not be, you know, as solidly contrasted as, you know, as this very bright white, maybe a bit mottled and dirty looking, but they do have that under there. The condition of this bird's feathers tells me it might be molting soon. They're really ragged looking. I can see like little notches and kind of dips taken out of the flight feather, the primaries here, and then the tail feathers. Birds have to molt every year, and sometimes multiple times a year, because imagine wearing the same outfit through day in and day out, all sorts of weather. You're eating in it, you're sleeping in it, your siblings are rubbing up against you. You would we would probably need to change our clothes a lot sooner than an eagle or a bird needs to molt out its feathers, but that is why they do that. Now we're getting into our third year, and we're starting to see some white show up on the head. We've got kind of like this dark blaze or stripe across the eye, but let me go back. Look at it's small here, but the eye and the beak are still very dark. And now the yellow is starting to spread. This part of the mouth, if birds have had lips, that would be, it's called the gape, but kind of that line where the beak opens is starting to yellow up, and the eye is getting lighter in color. Our fourth year, our eagle is looking very close to mature, dirty looking head. The body feathers are looking kind of ragged too. I can tell the edges of these feathers are looking kind of frayed and weathered, so this bird is probably going to molt soon as well, but the eye is bright, bright, bright yellow, and that beak is just beautiful yellow as well. And then we get to this. We get to our adult bald eagle. Males and females do not look different as far as plumage goes. I did say that the females are larger, but as far as looking at their plumage, there is no difference. So this was a kind of a fun fact that I learned about bald eagles. I thought that early settlers to this continent saw that white head and thought that they were bald from a distance. But really it comes from the term piebald. Now, usually people are familiar with the term piebald as it refers to white-tailed deer. Sometimes deer can get these white patches on them. They almost look like cow spots. And that's just a pigmentation kind of malfunction, so to speak, in a deer. But these are the markings of the bald eagle, has that white head. So a piebald eagle, it's a dark all over bird with a white tail and a white head, so it looks piebald, and then shortened down to just bald eagle. A long time ago, shortly after our country became a country, the bald eagle was incorporated as our nation's symbol. And there are documentations that there were as many as 100,000 eagles in the contiguous United States. Now, I don't love that for a couple reasons. We don't have, in 1782, people running around with a smartphone and eBird. We don't have people with binoculars. We don't have people even probably really caring about bald eagle populations. And so all of the records we have are probably pretty anecdotal. Also, we were not in every corner of this continent yet. We were not actively kicking eagles out with development yet. It was beginning, but we weren't, our things were different, 200 years ago. So, that is a place to start with numbers, but it's not comparable to today's numbers because our numbers are much more accurate today. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, there were only 72 bald eagle nests that were documented in the state of New York. This picture was taken, I believe, this spring. Somewhere in the Montezuma area. In the 1960s, there were only 417 across the lower 48 states. So, going back to early 1900s, so let's say 60 years before that, there were 72 alone in New York State, but now across the country, 60-ish years later, we've got 417. In the 70s and 1970s, there was only one pair of bald eagles remaining that was known. There were less than a dozen that were seen overwintering in the area, and the bald eagle was on the verge of extinction. So what happened to the bald eagles? Well, loss of habitat. So this is a neat graphic, and I should look to see if I can find one that's 40 years later, if we have these numbers. But from 1780 to 1980, over 200 years, the number in each state represents the percent lost of wetland habitat. And wetland habitat is the bald eagle's preference and primary habitat. So in New York State, in 200 years, we lost 60% of our wetlands, more than half. Then, you know, in Alaska, they lost only a tenth of their wetlands. So it varied across the country, but I think we could all agree. What is this? Is New Jersey down here? No, Delaware, maybe 73% lost. I think we can all agree that none of these numbers are good. 91% in California. There was also the millinery trade. So it was very fashionable for women to wear not only bird feathers, but bird parts and whole birds. So we can see this looks like maybe a bird wing on the left, and then all the way to the right, that's a whole bird, maybe a gull or a tern. The woman in the middle has these beautiful big white plumes. Those come from the great egret, which we have around here in the Finger Lakes. And actually Audubon got its start. So the Audubon Society began after John James Audubon had passed away. He had nothing to do with the Audubon Society, except that it was named after him. But this woman, Harriet Hemingway, which I think Harriet is in the middle, Harriet was a socialite in Boston, Massachusetts, and she was a radical woman looking to the future, and she saw how fashion was affecting bird populations. Now, it might not have necessarily affected bald eagles. I don't know if bald eagles were worn or their feathers were worn. I know they were used by indigenous people of this continent, but that's different. Indigenous people, the Native Americans, used resources very sustainably, and the Europeans that came in did not. So Harriet started going around to different socialite parties and putting pressure on women and saying, like, girls, this is not cool. It's not cute. Stop wearing dead birds on your hats. Like, it's not cute. You know, these birds are dying. You know, she did not get those plumes on her hat because someone plucked them out and let the bird go free, which still isn't nice. But no, they were just killed for their feathers or for their eggs. I was just in Maine and I learned a lot about puffins, and puffin colonies are on rocky islands, and they were very easy to catch, and their eggs were very easy to collect for eating. And I heard this horrible, you know, what the early people would do, early colonists, they would go onto the island and destroy all of the puffin eggs, and they would immediately start relaying, and then they go and collect them all because they knew that they were very fresh. And that is not sustainable. So Harriet eventually got the first Audubon Society together in Massachusetts, and now here we are over 100 years later, still working on bird conservation. But then probably the most commonly known reason for bald eagles declining was DDT. This was a chemical compound that was found in pesticides used, you know, on crops. And the bald eagle didn't directly eat the DDT, but this mechanism called bioaccumulation or biomagnification happened. So if you've ever read the warnings on, say, tuna or marlin or swordfish, you're cautioned to not eat too much because you can accumulate mercury in your system, because mercury exists in the environment. And those fish, like our primary consumer here, are eating producers like plant life or smaller phytoplankton, zooplankton. And when these chemicals make their way into the environment by way of runoff from crops, indiscriminate application, it gets into the water system, and then it works its way on up the chain. And as the animal gets larger, they're accumulating more and more and more in their system. In the 1940s, Congress recognized that the bald eagle was just on the cusp of extinction, and they passed the Bald Eagle Protection Act that prohibited killing them and possessing any parts or pieces of the species. Now, that still stands today, and there's more inclusive and exhaustive legislation that exists: the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, the Golden and Bald Eagle Act. But Native American peoples can still possess. There's a way they have to go about obtaining bald eagle feathers or even whole birds. There's a repository in Colorado where all dead bald eagles are to be sent, and then I don't want to say it's like a library, but they manage how the dead eagles or the parts of the feathers, whatever, get sent out to Native tribes, because they use them for a variety of reasons, and have long before colonists existed on this continent. But even though people may have still killed bald eagles or possessed parts or pieces, whatever, of them, it was now criminal and could be, people could be punished. Rachel Carson wrote a book, another radical woman looking to the future, wrote a book called Silent Spring, probably one of the most well-known books relating to conservation. And she basically turned the light on to the harm that the pesticides were having on the environment, and not just on the wildlife. But if you've ever seen the movie Erin Brockovich, which has Julia Roberts in it, but is a true story, Erin Brockovich became a champion for people who lived in places that were polluted and were being affected with cancer or these bizarre ailments, young children, because they were being infected by these pollutants in the environment in very high toxic doses. But Rachel Carson really got the ball moving and got DDT outlawed. And once that happened, things started moving in a positive direction for the eagles. How did DDT affect them? So I mentioned how long it takes for a bald eagle to reach sexual maturity, right? They have to make it through the gauntlet of the first 5 years of their life. They are avoiding altercations with other eagles, gray horned owls, maybe osprey. They are trying not to catch a disease, but the strongest ones will remain healthy. They're trying to eat well. They pick out a nesting site. They build a nest. They lay their eggs, and then this is where the DDT came in. The shell on the egg was weakened. So when they sat on the egg to incubate, they crushed their egg. And so, their turnaround time, that's really exhausting. And the season is short for having young, unless they're in the South where it's warm year round. But if they miss out on 1 year, they're unless the nest fails very early, they're probably out until the next year. So after the national ban on DDT in the 70s, and then the Endangered Species Act of 1973, this really helped these conservation laws in the New York State Endangered Species Program. The bald eagle was an endangered species at that time, and it afforded them the utmost protection of their nesting sites, of how you can approach them, the type of development that can go on. It's pretty rigorous, and it still stands today, even though they are not on the endangered species list. So in the mid-late 70s, New York State began the Bald Eagle Reintroduction Program, and this was a huge undertaking. The goal was they wanted to repopulate the eagles so that they could survive and thrive in New York State for the rest of the days that, until the end of time. And the program that was used to do this reintroduction, it was called hacking. Now, when I first learned this term, it always kind of resonates kind of gross to me, like hacking an eagle apart or something with an axe. That is not it. The way I interpret it is that it's a hack, meaning like a shortcut or another way to do something. And so I'll explain more about the hacking program, but that it was very commonly used with peregrine falcons and osprey as well, which both of those species were affected by DDT as well, and loss of habitat and illegal hunting and all of that as well. But the bald eagles really took the spotlight. Took this picture on Earth Day of this year. This is on the Montezuma Audubon Center property. It is back in a swamp, so we do not really share with people where it is, but you should not approach either. This tree is located about 350 feet before you reach the nest. You can see the nest from the spot, but this is so that people do not disturb eagles. Sometimes they're very sensitive and may abandon the nest that they're working on or have laid, you know, because there's people around for whatever reason. So you're not supposed to approach a nest. So again, just want to remind you, this is where the complex, the Montezuma Wetlands Complex is. The Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge was chosen as the site to begin this hacking program because it was a large, suitable area. It was, you know, thousands of acres of wetland and forest, and it was just a really nice, healthy place that they envisioned bald eagles living. There was an abundance of prey. There was not too many disturbances because there weren't, well, this was in the 70s, so the thruway did exist in the 70s. The New York State Thruway was built in the 1950s, so it did exist at that time, but if you've ever visited Montezuma, there's not much going through the middle of it. It's acres and acres of wetland habitat. So it was pretty limited on disturbances, and because it was such a large area of protected wetlands, so I should also add that the Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge was established in 1938. So there wasn't agriculture peppered throughout the wetlands that would be poisoning the environment. The habitat is just perfect. We have lots of trees. They love to nest in trees. There's wetlands all over the place. We have the Erie Canal, we have the Finger Lakes, and then to our north, we also have the Great Lakes or Lake Ontario. So hacking. There were a couple different ways that they did this, but the main kind of way that this was done, this tower was erected, and this still stands today, and I visited it a couple years ago. It's not accessible by the public, like as far as like legalities go, but also it's like very physically difficult to get to. It's very overgrown with multi-floor rows and grapevines and poison ivy, and it was a mission to get in there. But one of the staff members of the National Wildlife Refuge wanted me to see this, so she brought me out there. So this tower was erected, and then a cage was built to hold the eaglets in. They didn't want them to fall out, but they were still exposed to the weather. Okay, so I think I'm getting a little out of order here, but bald eagle chicks were taken from nests in other states where there was a more robust eagle population. So Alaska, Wisconsin, Maryland. They were taken from the nest, maybe just one. Eagles usually have more than 1, 2, maybe 3 eaglets. It was taken from the nest when it was very young. So I can see this bird has adult feathers coming in. We got pin feathers here. I still see a little bit of down. So this bird is not yet fledged. I can also tell from the color of the bird, it's very dark. But they were taken from the nest and then brought to New York. And they were fit with tags or bands or a transmitter, which is, it can send out a signal so that when the birds, or if the birds did successfully fledge the nest, they could still be kept, tabs could still be kept on them. So there's an eagle in this box, and whoever this is has the lucky job of being up on top of this 40-foot tower and hoisting eagles up to the top. There they are. Little gangly looking guys. They are pretty close to fledging. You can see there's a carp here in the foreground, so somebody brought them a carp. And like I said, it was open to the weather, because on a wild eagle nest, they would be exposed to snow, wind, rain, heat, sun. And so they needed to experience that to be, you know, to be properly adjusted to being an eagle. This was the first pair in 1976. And I can't remember, I haven't done this presentation in a few months. So I may be skipping ahead, but I'll tell you just in case so I don't forget. This pair, so they're not biologically related. These were 2 eaglets taken from 2 separate nests and then put together. So they're not biologically related. But if I remember correctly, after they successfully fledged, they formed the first new wild nest in New York State about 5 years after this in Watertown. And that was determined because they had the transmitters on them, the tags, the bands, which allowed them to be resighted and their signal to be picked up. So that was really, really exciting news for the biologists working on this project. As biologists who work with wild animals, you know, we handle them for whatever reason, whatever data we're trying to collect. But once you release that animal, it is very slim chance that you're ever going to encounter that bird or that animal again. Because, you know, sometimes like a turtles don't move very far out of, you know, their kind of home range is a pond or a wetland. They don't move very far, but a bald eagle, these birds can fly hundreds of miles, especially when they're dispersing as newly fledged eagles. So this was a real sign of success for these, for the biologists working on this project. There was, here's early reality TV, perhaps. A camera was put up on top of the tower, so the staff that was working on this project could be, you know, not bothering the eagles, but so they could see what they were up to up there, if they were eating, if they were, you know, socializing, interacting, if any other birds or wildlife tried to come in and mess with them. And so it's so funny, like, you know, I can get pictures on my phone from a live feed in New Guinea, but this was the early version of that. So some notable people who had a lot to do with this program, Dr. Thomas Cade from Cornell University, Mike Allen and Pete Nye, both legendary people. If you were a young wildlife biology student like myself, I learned a lot about them. They were decades before my time, but really, I mean, they made it so that I can bring people out on birding tours at Montezuma and show them bald eagles almost every single time. If we don't see a bald eagle and I take you out, I'm doing something wrong because I'm not looking hard enough. They're everywhere. They're very prolific. So the eagles did fledge. This first pair did fledge. They kept coming back to be fed because, you know, if someone's going to feed you, it's easier. And food was made available at the tower. Now, when they were up in that cage up there, before they had fledged, it was the responsibility of whoever was there to climb up there with fish and the old eagle hand puppet so that the birds did not associate human faces with food. Believe it or not, bald eagles definitely can figure that out. You could probably type in bald eagles Alaska in a second, get hundreds of videos of eagles landing on fishing boats, people tossing fish up in the air to eagles and them catching them. Eagles are one of those species that has adapted to human life, unfortunately. But they wanted to set these eagles up for the best life possible, and they did not want these eagles to associate humans with food. So while they were providing food, they did, you know, went through the steps necessary so that their faces were hidden. And then by the end of the summer and early fall, the eagles were catching their own fish. So I mentioned one way that the eagles were reintroduced, and that's through this hand-rearing hacking program. But then the remaining bald eagle pair, I believe, was found was on the south end of Hemlock Lake. If you're familiar with Hemlock, I think it was late 1800s, the city of Rochester bought up hundreds of acres surrounding Hemlock Lake because it is the city of Rochester's drinking water source. So it made sense that, you know, these eagles are going to find a pretty protected and pristine area to nest. And if I can't remember where I learned this or how I learned this, but it was a linesman, so somebody working on utility poles, that found the nest because he was way up high, you know, working on the utility lines, and found the nest. And I believe he was actually then incorporated into the like working with this wild pair of nesting eagles. And so it says here, the manipulation of the state's only remaining native pair. So the biologist would maybe go up and stick an extra eaglet in there and then just hope, like, hopefully they don't notice. And, mom or dad got back from fishing and they're like, oh crap, there's 4 of them now. Well, whatever, and it was successful. And that technique is used, I've heard it used with black bears, other animals. Black bears, it's successful because they are, they're in a sleeping state during the winter time. And so they're pretty sluggish. They're not moving around too much. And it could be pretty easy for an extra cub to be slid in there by a biologist. And then mom wakes up and she's like, holy cow, what happened? And so those 2 methods were very successful in the bald eagle restoration. So in total, 23 eagles were released. They fledged from Montezuma. And like I said, so that first pair was in 1976. So 4 or 5 years later, in Watertown is when those first 2 eagles were found nesting on their own near Watertown. And by the early 80s, so not too long, less than 10 years, the program was so successful that they shut themselves down. They accomplished what they wanted to accomplish, and they shut down the program at Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge and then moved the program out to Oak Orchard, which is near Buffalo. And this is Oak Orchard Wildlife Management Area, is state land, New York State DEC. And then in 1987, so just about 9 years after this reintroduction program began, the first bald eagle nest was seen at Montezuma in over 30 years. So in total, the New York State bald eagle hacking program fledged 200 or nearly 200 bald eagle nestlings. Most were from Alaska. If you've ever been to Alaska, or you know anything about Alaska, bald eagles are as common as, even more so than red-tailed hawks, if you're in the right habitat. If you're near the coast or any water, they're everywhere. So they could stand to share some of their population. And so not only was the program successful and the fledging successful, but the birds returned to not only live in New York, but raise their own young. And that was a true testament to how successful the project was. And by 1989, 10 nesting pairs, newly established nesting pairs. So it did not take much time at all. I think I said the first pair was, let me go back and see, when was that? Sorry, where was that information? Somebody's probably yelling it at me in the silence of their, oh, 1980, okay. So 1980 to 1989 went from 1 pair to 10 pairs. Amazing. And now today, we don't know for sure because it's hard to count wild animals, but there are more than 400 pairs of bald eagles nesting in New York State and 11,000 in the lower 48. We don't include Alaska because they are like their own, they never had an issue with bald eagles. So it would be kind of skewing the data to include them. Here's some pictures of eagles coming from wherever. This looks very much like Alaska. So here on the right, this picture shows these are the carrying crates that the eagles were kept in, and like, why are they allowing the eagles out of the crates? Like, won't they fly away? No, these are young eagles. Remember, they are not yet at the fledging stage. So while they're transporting them, they let them out of the boxes to stretch their wings a little bit. Imagine being in a boat, not part of this project, and seeing this boat go by with eagles sitting on top of it. Probably a pretty interesting sight to behold. And then they were loaded into planes and they were flown to where they needed to go. So I want to talk about the Breeding Bird Atlas. This is a really cool community science program that's going on. It's hosted through eBird by Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and it's on a state-by-state basis. In New York State, the first breeding bird survey was done in the early 80s. It's a 5-year survey. Anyone can participate. You do have to sign up. You do have to learn some protocol and things, but it's a way, and it's not just bald eagles, it's all nesting breeding birds in New York State. And there's a variety of different behaviors and things like that that we can use to determine if there is a possible breeding, probable, or confirmed. Confirmed would be like live young in a nest. Probable would be, an adult eagle sitting on a nest, most likely incubating, but we can't see the eggs, so we don't know for sure, but probably, because what else would it be doing? And then possible, maybe observing a courtship display. They're not at the breeding part yet, but it's possible that they're working that way. So if you look at the early 80s in New York, so remember that first here, that this blue square up here, that's that first eagle pair that nested on their own. And there was only one other. This might be Oak Orchard or out near Oak. No, it's not Oak Orchard. No, that's Hemlock Lake. Sorry. That's the south end of Hemlock Lake. And then you can see up in the Adirondacks and down the Catskills, there were other possible or probable breeding eagles. Look at this kind of junction right here. So here's this is Wayne County, this is Seneca, and this is Cayuga. So this area is where the Montezuma the Montezuma Wetlands Complex is, including the Refuge. Let's go to the next survey data set, which is in 2000 to 2005. Look at all of the eagles. So 20 years later, look at all those blue dots. We've got confirmed eagles along the St. Lawrence in the Adirondacks. This line right here is the Hudson River. This is Susquehanna, Delaware River, perhaps, Catskills. Here is Montezuma. This looks like it would be Oak Orchard, perhaps, or even maybe, no, I bet that is Iroquois National Wildlife Refuge. That's in Basin. But you can see across the southern tier as well, there's just a lot more. Let's go back 20 years. Amazing. So now 20 years later, 2020 to 2025, we are in the midst of our third round of breeding bird surveys. So at the end of 2025, all of the data will have been collected for all of the breeding birds across New York State, but I'm very excited to see what this map looks like for bald eagles. Another interesting species, which we're not talking about tonight, but I just want to mention, is sandhill cranes. There was not a map generated for them in 80 to 85. In 2000 to 2005, the first breeding pair of sandhill cranes in New York State had been found, and that was in the Montezuma Wetlands Complex. And there's just a few little blips on the map, but now we are seeing sandhill cranes breeding all over the place. Most of them are most likely in the Montezuma area, but we're seeing them show up near Honeoye Lake. I've seen them show up near Baldwinsville, throughout the Finger Lakes. I mean, it's just amazing what is happening. So I can't wait to see their map at the end of this next survey round. So I just wanted to show you, so this is data that I took from eBird. So I'll briefly mention what eBird is if you're unfamiliar. eBird is a mega database that is owned and managed by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, which is in Ithaca, New York. And it is a place for anyone to submit bird sightings. You do not have to be a professional. You do not have to be a biologist. You should have some basic bird knowledge because you are supposed to be able to identify birds. The more you know, the better your data is, but they will accept data from anyone. And this is worldwide. So the data that we have about birds is just amazing. And so I just took a quick snapshot. You'll see that the parameters I used were year-round of this current year. So every month of 2021, these are all of the bald eagle sightings in the Finger Lakes area in general. So all of this right here, that's all Montezuma Wetlands Complex, Cayuga Lake, Seneca Lake here. And this is not breeding eagles. It could be, but these are just sightings. Over here, we have Onondaga Lake to the right in the top right corner of the screen, Onondaga Lake, which has got great eagle activity lately over the past few years. So this is really, really cool. This is just, January 1st through today of this year. Here's just August alone. So from August 1st until today, these are all of the bald eagle sightings in that, general same area. So again, the bulk of them are on or the north of Cayuga Lake and the Montezuma Wetlands Complex, but then there's a bunch over in on Onondaga Lake. These 4 blips here that looks like Erie Canal, along Erie Canal, and then we see a bunch around the Finger Lakes as well. But remember, this is just this month. What is today? The 24th. So this is only 24 days of data that's been submitted. So across the country, there is the Midwinter Bald Eagle Survey that's done, and including in the Montezuma Wetlands Complex. It's a really fun day. We did do it in 2020. I'm trying to remember, because we do it in February, I believe, or late January. And in 2020, there was a government shutdown, federal government shutdown. So the Refuge staff were not allowed to work, and no one was allowed on federal property. So we had to put a big pause, or maybe that was 2019, because I'm trying to remember. So you can see here in 2019, our numbers were high, not the highest in the last, 9 years or so, but they were high. And then in 2020, they dropped down. So if I remember correctly, we couldn't do the survey at the same time that is like the same day, so to speak. So let's say the 3rd Friday of January. It's always done on the 3rd Friday of January. But in that year, we had to do it like a month later because the federal government was shut down. So there was a month difference. And also, I remember this day in 2020 was a rainy, it was kind of mild, like mild for January, not pleasant, but rainy, windy, miserable. So it's not that we lost a bunch of eagles between 2019 and 2020, but we were surveying in a different month, and the weather conditions were gross, which windy, rainy weather like that often makes raptors kind of sit tight. They'll just find a tree and roost rather than waste the energy fighting the elements. So there's some things working against us, but this is still great news. I don't know what happened this year. I was not part of it. I would like to add that data, but we see that we've got a trajectory that's going onwards and upwards. And this is just the Montezuma Wetlands Complex, not New York State as a whole. And if you're interested in something like this, we do take volunteers to help with this survey. You would get paired with someone who's more seasoned and experienced, but it's a really cool way to get out and see some places of the refuge or the complex in general that you might not know about or have access to otherwise, and get to learn a lot about bald eagles. So the map on the left, there's some circles there. I don't have specific areas listed, but there are bald eagle nests in those circles somewhere. But the other thing is, there's 2 things. We don't want to give people a map, so to speak, of where exactly to find them. Probably 90% of people are going to be respectful and take a picture and enjoy it from a distance, but there will be people who have to encroach upon their space and bother them with taking pictures, whatever. So we don't share that information. But the other part of it is they don't nest in places that are convenient for us. They nest in the woods, they nest in trees that are often obscured by leaves. So they're not that accessible. Even if I wanted or could tell you where they are, it's not going to be a great viewing experience for you. However, this year we had a new bald eagle nest pop up, and this was viewable. You can still see it, and as we get into the fall and the leaves fall, it's really going to be easy to see it. But this is observable from the wildlife drive at Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge. If you're familiar with the wildlife drive, you've done it before. There's a section that there's a culvert that goes under the road, and it's a place where carp are trying to get in from the Seneca River through the culvert. There's a sign there talking about the carp and whatnot. We call that the spillway. That's where the main pool, there's a dam there, and it drains out under the road there. So it's the spillway. Directly across the river, this bald eagle nest appeared, and it's in a great spot because it's relatively close. People can't get there because it's across a river and in a wetland, but you get great views from the wildlife drive. And so this picture, it's not the best, it's not going to win awards, but this picture was taken by Refuge volunteer Jackie Baker, who is an amazing birder. She does birding surveys all times of year. She actually broke her arm this winter out doing a bird survey. She slipped and broke her arm, but she was back at it as soon as she could. She took this picture on March 23rd, and what do we see in this little notch here is a baby eagle. So we got to watch. So the wildlife drive doesn't open until April 1st. So they had a couple weeks of privacy, but then people were getting to watch. There was two, get them watching them grow up, watching the adults coming and going, and then we watched them fledge. And it was just a really awesome thing to experience and very considerate of the bald eagles. Another great place to look for eagles is the Lake Ontario shoreline. They are popping up all over the place because obviously there's great, hunting grounds for them there, not only fish, but waterfowl as well, maybe small mammals like muskrats or beaver or mink or things like that. And there are nests along the shore as well. These data points are not indicating nests, but just bald eagle sightings so year round in the current year. So from January 1st to today, these are all the bald eagle sightings in our general area. This blob down here is the Montezuma Wetlands Complex again. And that's around the Savannah is where our Audubon Center is. There's some places that are really good spots to watch for migrating raptors, birds of prey. And one of them is Derby Hill, which is managed by Onondaga Audubon, which is a chapter of Audubon. And it's out near Oswego. And it's up on the lake shore. It's a hill that's right on the south shore of Lake Ontario. And as we have raptors, birds of prey coming through migrating, they're riding the thermals, which are warm air currents coming up off the earth. So you see turkey vultures or hawks soaring around or eagles soaring around. They're riding those thermals. It's kind of like coasting on your bike. They're still moving, but they're saving energy. And once they hit the lake shore, the lake is colder than the land. So those thermals disappear. And so they kind of come to a pinch point and they have to decide, am I going to go east or west? But being in that spot is a really great place to watch for migrating eagles. There's another one west of Rochester, Braddock Bay Raptor Research, or the Braddock Bay Raptor Research, but there's a count location there as well. But Derby Hill's data, you can see, continues to increase. I don't know what the causes of these dips are. It would be interesting to look back at perhaps weather during the survey times, during migration. Maybe that had something to do with it. But we can see that the trend is onward and upwards. Onondaga Lake, I mentioned it. So if you are from the central New York region, you know what Onondaga Lake is, you know where it is. It had the wonderful designation as being the country's most polluted lake due to poor industry practices, illegal dumping and pollution for decades and decades. And a lot of work has been done over the past, 10, 15 years to do cleanup. And personally, I don't know if I'd go swimming in it, but I think that we could agree that when the bald eagles, an apex predator, top of the food chain, start to come in droves and hang out at the lake, that something must be right. So in 2019, we experienced a polar vortex. So bitter cold Arctic air came down from the northern pole and settled over us, and it was bitterly cold. I don't know if anyone remembers that, but it was very, very cold. And because of that, a lot of water froze. On Onondaga Lake, there's a wastewater treatment facility, and the effluent water, the water coming out, the treated water, is warmer, thus keeping some ice back on Onondaga Lake. So it attracted lots of waterfowl like ducks, geese, and swans, and then the eagles. So you can see we've got eagles of all different ages hanging out here. We've got adults and juveniles. We've got a red-tailed hawk here, I think. There's some crows in the background, but lots and lots of eagles. And I think I don't remember the exact high count, but in one day there was like over 100 bald eagles here roosting. Call this a winter roost. So they're not all living here year round. They're not all nesting here. Actually, at this time, there were no nesting bald eagles on Onondaga Lake. But they were just, it was a great, the buffet was good. It was popping. They were there for the ducks, the fish, the muskrats, and it was a good place to be. And it could support them. So they have come back like that in 2020 and 2021, but it's not been as bitterly cold and for an extended period of time since 2019. So they've been back maybe in the dozens, but not over 100. So when it gets super cold, you want to go over there. I swear the best place to go, you're going to go to the Best Buy parking garage, the second floor at the Destiny USA Mall, and you get a great view of the eagles there, and you can set up your tripod or your camera or binoculars and have a great time watching the eagles. And so now they're back. They're no longer on the endangered species list. This was just snapshots of articles that I pulled from all over the place. Smithsonian, New York Times, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, CBS News, Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It's estimated that over 300,000 eagles are now living in the lower 48. There are over 71,000 active pairs as of 2019 that are breeding across the lower 48. And it's just amazing. It's just amazing what has happened. Once you remove a toxin from the environment and start protecting habitat, they'll come back. It's not that hard. It was pretty cool. And yes, they got some help with reintroduction, but that's not been going on for years, and they're doing it all on their own now. So I was trying to be done by 8 o'clock. It's 8:10. That's not too bad. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and have many people appreciate bald eagles, but a further appreciation of what Montezuma has done for the bald eagles. And I'd be happy to answer any questions if you'd like to pop them in the chat. I also don't really know how WebEx works, so if you're able to come on video and voice, you're welcome to do that as well. But thank you to Allie for inviting me, and it never gets old talking about bald eagles. So thank you for coming on tonight.
Thank you, Alyssa. That was a lot of amazing information. I do see one question in the chat right now. It was from earlier. Okay. Was the hacking station on the north end of Cayuga Lake?
It was off the northern end. So if this is Ken P, who I know, yes, or if you're familiar with Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge, if you were at Shockey Pool, Shockey is spelled T-S-C-H-A-C-H-E, to Shockey. It's off of Route 89, and it's what I call like a fire tower, but a big like 2-story observation tower. If you look like west-northwest across, that is where the tower was erected. And so it's what's called Clark's Ridge. It's kind of a high point. You can see the ridge from the tower there, but you can't. I'm gonna look this winter and see if I could pick it out, pick the tower out with a spotting scope, but it's all buried by it. Like the forest is reclaiming it, so you can't really see it. So yeah, it's off the north end of Cayuga Lake, but it's off of more specifically Shockey Pool. Good question.
10 pieces. Thanks, Alyssa. I'm going to give people a minute to submit any questions, but I did have a question about their nests. Yeah. I mean, I see in this picture, there's a bunch of sticks. Do they use anything else for their nests?
Not really. They use these sticks and branches that and they use the same nest year after year, and they build onto it. So they can get quite large, huge. I think one was once measured, or I don't know how this was determined, but to be 1 ton in weight. If you know what osprey nests look like, they are very similar in appearance, same materials. Ospreys are much more likely to build on a man-made structure. So if you visited Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge and along 5 and 20, you've seen nest after nest after nest on the utility poles there. Those are all osprey nests. I've been argued with before. Someone said to me, no, I saw an eagle there. I'm sure you saw a bald eagle sitting there one time, but those are osprey nests. But structurally, they're made out of the same thing. I'm sure glued together by eagle poop and dead fish parts. But they're mainly just what you see here, these big sticks. And it's really cool to see them flying with them. I've seen it in the sky. I'm like, what the heck is that? Like thinking something was stuck to the eagle, like around its foot or whatever. No, another time I watched an eagle come down right behind the Audubon Center. It was just this last like January or February. There was no snow on the ground. It came down and landed, and I thought like, oh, cool. Maybe it just pounced on like a squirrel or a rabbit or I don't know, a prey of some sort. But it picked up a stick, and then in its talons were also tons of like dried grasses. So when it was flying, it was like a big long kite hanging out behind it, which was, the first time I saw it prior to watching this happen, I was like, well, oh my God, like, is that garbage stuck to it or something?
Mm-hmm.
But no, just, it's hard to, with your eagle talons, pick the grass away from your stick, but they will actually line their nest, like the bowl of their nest, with some dried grasses as well.
Okay.
Which we can't really see. I think I just had another question.
Yeah. Yep. Any idea? Oh, did you read it? Sorry. I didn't know.
When the main pool is being filled back in? No, that's a good question. So the main pool at the National Wildlife Refuge off the Wildlife Drive, if you visited, it's on the left-hand side, and they took the water out of it this spring, early summer for management reasons. So it's all grown up with plants now, and from what I understand, the refuge biologist has been trying to maintain lower water, but Mother Nature is like, no, not this year, because it's been raining so much through July, and then last week's rain event, the dam is open, so to speak, letting water drain out, but it's just filling in. So I don't know, and it's on my list of questions for them. I'd like to know, but I would expect probably pretty soon that they will dam that up and allow the water to start gathering again.
Alyssa, I have another question.
Yeah.
You might have mentioned this, but are they monogamous?
They are. Yep. So they will pair bond for life, which is, very sweet. You might not see them together at all times of year, especially like now through mid-fall, late fall, but come November, at least in New York, they're gonna start like, hey, like, remember me? And they'll start hanging out together. And so across the road from the Audubon Center is a cell tower, and osprey built a nest up there, but for a couple winters the eagles were hanging out up there, and they actually did nest one winter, but the nest failed. It was really cool because, like what I just said, bald eagles don't typically nest on a man-made structure, and here they were nesting on a man-made structure in a very convenient place for us to watch them right outside the Audubon Center. We had a spotting scope set up on it. Really cool. But it failed for some reason. But we'd see them like starting in December, the eagles sitting up there together, just hanging out, I guess. So yes, they do pair bond. If one passes away for some reason, I believe that they will repair, but they will stay together if they're able to.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ken said something again.
Okay. Okay, so he says peregrine falcon has been hanging out in the eagle tree this past Sunday. 2 eagles and a peregrine in that eagle tree at the same time. So on the wildlife drive at the refuge, just near that point where the carp are trying to get in from the river, and there's the culvert, there's a big dead, probably an old willow or cottonwood tree. And a lot of us who frequent the refuge call that the eagle tree because we often see eagles. And so Ken's saying he saw a peregrine falcon there and a couple eagles. My coolest collection of birds I saw in that tree were great blue heron, great egret, cormorant, green heron, and an osprey. It was a couple summers ago, all sitting in the tree. It was like ornaments in the tree. It's pretty cool. The tree's big enough so they can all have their own space, but it was pretty neat. It's a good spot to look. Their birds are a lot like us. They're going to choose a convenient place that gives them a good vantage point. So a big dead tree that's very tall with no foliage on it, that gives them a good way to look out for, a food source or, a competition or anything like that. They're going to land there too. So keep your eyes on those dead trees, because you may be rewarded with an eagle or an osprey or vulture or a hawk or a peregrine falcon. I think people miss a lot of birds because they're not paying attention to the trees a lot of times.
Right. Okay.
Anything
I mean,
else?
I have a million other questions, but I can privately message you
Okay.
about that. But I don't see any more questions at the moment. So I guess we're gonna wrap it up. Thank you everybody that attended tonight. Thank you very much, Alyssa. That was
My
awesome.
pleasure.
Really appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me, and I hope everyone has a great night, and maybe I'll see you out at Montezuma sometime.
Okay. So usually I just let people leave. Everybody's
I don't know how to maneuver around this, so I don't know if people are still here or not.
saying 2 people are still. I wonder if I can.
All right. Well, thank you. Anything else? Are you good?
No, that's it. I just want to say thank you one more time.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. And think about like March timeframe. I would be happy to do the snow goose or like waterfowl